Ben Roethlisberger is headed to Canton. He's now retired, but given that we're still a few weeks out from training camp, we need things to talk about here on Bleav in Steelers. So,
Maurkice
question.
So who's the Steeler next to the Hall of Fame? It's Maurkice Pouncey. I just think straight up.
Okay.
Maurkice came in as a rookie, and we couldn't sit him. And we just paid. Was it Jeff Hartwig? We just paid the old veteran center. It's just Maurkice came in with so much nasty tenacity. He's just an old school kind of still. I'm talking about you were seeing Maurkice down 35, 40 yards down the field blocking whoever. And that was just him. He was small in stature, but he played big on the field. He wasn't a typical center size, but he was super smart, super aggressive, and he was about whatever. I mean on the field and off the field. Them Pouncey boys don't play no games. But for me, man, he was just too consistent. Enough Pro Bowls. You had to have somebody who's the anchor of the offensive line. That was Pouncey. His peers respected him. Peers on other teams respected him. Mr. Consistent. So it's a reason why 7 felt some kind of way when Pouncey retired. He knew who Pouncey was. It was that love relationship between the quarterback and the center. And once you find a special center, man, it's hard. It's hard to kind of, 1, get away from him. 2, you understood. I think 7 was at a point in his career was like he's been through enough centers. Once he got Pouncey, he was like, man, it's a Hall of Fame. As soon as I played with Pouncey, saw him, I said, man, he's a Hall of Famer. You just know. Like, we knew 7 was going to the Hall of Fame. Eventually, Hines Ward would get to the Hall of Fame. Yep. We knew Troy, just in practice, was going to the Hall of Fame, and Maurkice Pouncey was going to the Hall of Fame as well. Like, that's just my personal opinion. But in practice, the first time they step on the field of training camp, who's a Hall of Famer, who's not. Who can be borderline Hall of Fame and who's not. But to have them guys that I just named, you knew from the get-go, from the gate mark, they were Hall of Famers. And I think Maurkice Pouncey is next in line to be from the Pittsburgh Steelers to go to the Hall of Fame.
Ike, you took this in a totally different direction, but I agree with you. You've convinced me. The 2 names I wrote down, T.J. Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, I didn't even think about Pouncey. Obviously, I think he's deserving. I think Cam Hayward will be deserving. Hines Ward, you mentioned. The fact that L.C. Greenwood is not in the Hall of Fame, and I'm reading Gary Pomerantz's book, Their Life's Work, right now about the 1970s Steelers. The fact that Greenwood's not in the Hall of Fame is an absolute joke. But it kind of goes back to something you've told me where it's like, there's too many Steelers in the Hall of Fame already. We only have so many room for them. But doing this exercise, if I commit to 1 name, I'm being unfair to other players. And Pouncey's someone I just completely overlooked. So it's like that's kind of my point, because everyone you just named, whether they get in or not, I could make the argument that they're deserving. Now, you mentioned Hines Ward. You got to put Torrey Holt in before Hines Ward gets in, but Hines is right there too.
Yeah, Hines changed the game. And I've seen this live in person. When you see a defense like the Baltimore Ravens look for 86, because they knew 86 was putting people to sleep, no NyQuil. That said a lot in my mind. When you watch other teams, when you watch linebackers and safeties scared and flinch when they see 86 come around, like, dang, the young man play receiver. I'm glad Woden, we used to call Hines Woden. I'm glad Woden's on my side, is on my team, because to be that aggressive at that wide receiver position, to play with no mouthpiece at that wide receiver position, to play with no MCL or PCL because he tore all that when he was small, says a lot about the man. But the man played running back if you needed him to. He played quarterback if you needed him to, because that's what he did at Georgia. He just so happened to be the Pittsburgh Hall of Fame wide receiver. And that's what I'm going to call him. When it came down to intensity, when it came down to just being all around, whether it's blocking, catching the ball in traffic, or having long runs, Hines Ward did it for a long time at a high level. So that's just Hines. When it came down to, hey, man, who do we look for in crunch time? It was number 86, Hines Ward. So, and he always did it with a smile. And that's what you didn't like. He had that Joker smile on him, but he'll try to break your face ASAP in a New York minute. That was just Hines Ward. So Hines Ward, for me, like you said, I think should be in the Hall of Fame. The reason why I named him because, he's retired. The reason why I named Maurkice, because he's retired. When you name T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, and Minka Fitzpatrick, I think they'll be in the Hall of Fame as well. They're just not retired yet. So I was just going off of guys who's retired. But 3 guys you named, Mark, I do agree 100% with you. Them boys will make it to the Hall of Fame if they keep going at this steady pace, especially TJ. I think Cam is already in. I think Cam have enough Pro Bowls and all pros to get any Hall of Fame. TJ keep doing what he's doing. You really can't deny TJ. Minka, I think Minka got to put a little bit more work on his resume for him to get in. But yeah, for me right now, it's Maurkice. He should be next. We'll see what they do with Hines Ward. I agree with you. They'll try to get Torrey Holt before they get Hines Ward in. But if Torrey Holt and Hines Ward is on the same ticket, they might just get in at the same time, depending on how the staff feels about both of these 2 receivers.
We have to mention one other hard hitter, Ike, and that was on the defensive side of the football, your teammate, James Harrison, as well. So it's like you're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, and if you don't have your head on a swivel, Ike, there could be hell to pay. I mean, in all seriousness. So there's yet another name. Bless you.
Thank you. No lie. That's just, man, I play with a lot of Hall of Famers, including a coaching staff and a Hall of Fame GM and a Hall of Fame owner. So I was just surrounded by greatness, to be honest with you.
Ike, to answer the question from my standpoint, I know for sure TJ is going to get in as long as he continues on. And the fact that he holds the record with Michael Strahan for single season sacks, I think all of those other players are deserving, and we can make the case. I mean, we could talk till sundown about that. But to answer the question from my standpoint, I'll go TJ Watt. But Ike, this goes back to something you told me we first started doing the show, where it's like, there's too many Hall of Famers from the Pittsburgh Steelers in Canton. And like, I to put a bow on this, I kind of look at it from this standpoint. If some of these players played for other franchises and accomplished what they did for one of the other 31 franchises in the league, there would be no question. But because there are already so many Steelers in the Hall of Fame, and it's like, how many Steelers are we going to put in? This is exactly my point, because everyone we just named, it's just like, I'll answer the question and say TJ Watt, but it's just like, I'm not happy with my answer, because all those other players were just outstanding players, Ike.
Man, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we've had this conversation plenty of times, like, hey, y'all front office, y'all step y'all Hall of Fame game up. Like, we can't help that we draft real well. We can't help that we find the Ike Taylors, the Antonio Browns. We can't help that we find the Les Swans. We can't help that we find the Franco Harrisons. We can't help that we find the L.C. Greenwoods. We can't help that we find the Terry Bradshaws. We can't help that we find the Big Bens, the Troy Polamalu's, the James Harrison, the James Ferris. We can't help that we find all these great players. We can't help that we find the Cam Haywards, the T.J. Watts. We can't help that we find all these good players. Like, we just can't help that we draft or find these good players and they wind up being excellent players for a long period of time and being Hall of Famers. We can't help that as an organization. If y'all front office, y'all need to get our recipe. Y'all need to step y'all game up. Y'all need to come at our needs. Y'all need to see how we draft and evaluate and get these players. But for the Hall of Fame committee, y'all shouldn't be mad as well. Y'all shouldn't be saying that we got too many Steelers in the Hall of Fame. It's not Pittsburgh's fault. I thought as an organization you have one thing to do, and that's to win Lombardies and get as many as good players you can on the team. And that's all Pittsburgh Steelers do. You know, they say iron sharpens iron, and Pittsburgh Steelers has been doing that since the 70s. You know, they've been bringing good draft picks and Hall of Fame guys since the 70s. They had a little dead period when it came down to the 90s, but from the 2000 up, when Kevin Colbert took it back over, man, Pittsburgh Steelers, you could just look at Kevin Colbert's resume. So when you got Hall of Fame GMs, you know, potentially Kevin Colbert going to – when you got Hall of Fame coaches,
There's another one.
Bill Cowher and Coach Tomlin, whenever he retires, I play with the Hall of Famer Dick LeBeau, you know, as a coaching staff. And we ain't even going to talk about Russ Grimm, who's one of the first Hogs when it came down to the Washington Redskins at the time, offensive lineman. We ain't gonna talk about Coach Papa Art Rooney. Dan Rooney. When he wound up getting inducted to the Hall of Fame, my first couple of years when I played in the league. So when you just surrounded by greatness, that's just what it is. They got the recipe to be consistent in winning ball games, putting themselves in position to hopefully get to the Super Bowl and win the Bardis. But the Hall of Fame committee, y'all can't be mad that the Pittsburgh Steelers know how to draft. That's just what I'm saying from my personal opinion. All you got to do is respect it. So from the Hall of Fame, from Ike Taylor to the Hall of Fame committee, man, what y'all need to tell other teams, hey, man, these guys been playing at a high level for a long period of time. We can't help that the Pittsburgh Steelers figured it out. Maybe some of y'all should go in their front office and see how they evaluate players and get guys like that year in and year out.
All right. So Ike's pick, Maurkice Pouncey. I'll go with TJ Watt. We will move on because I hope that wasn't too many name dropping, Ike. But again, there are so many players who are deserving.